Morning. Well, good afternoon in London, Caro. It's great to see you again. Although on the internet, I would love to be sharing some pints or some coffee with you in London. Unfortunately, we have to do it through the system, but I believe it's also a good instrument to actually reconnect with people that you haven't seen in ages. And I think this is one of the big advantages of what we're experiencing right now. So in this 10 minutes, let me address three things that I've seen in Latin America in our classes, in our sessions. First, challenges. Two, some of the responses by the universities. And three, some of the responses by teachers that we've seen as good practice now in terms of online teaching. Of course, in the context of Colombia and Latin America. To begin with the challenges, I believe there's at least three types of challenges. One of them, the first one, is technical or technological, regarding to technological issues. Unfortunately, the coverage of internet in Latin America is not as wide as you will see in other countries, in developed countries particularly. So that poses a first of the challenges. Many of our students don't even own a computer. So it's very difficult to have classes all the time with people that don't even have an access to the computer itself. When you look at the main cities, you might find some good internet coverage, and internet is quite fast, or is quite rapid. But if you go outside of the main cities, to small towns, you might not find a good internet connection. And many of the people that study in the main cities actually come from smaller towns. So they have, for this period, decided to go back to their real houses, to their parents' houses, and then they face a technological challenge in terms of the access to the internet. A colleague of mine, for example, gave me an example of one of his students that had to go to the central, to like the cafe in the main square, to actually get connected on her phone for 30 minutes per day in order to get some access to the classes. But if you go to the house of the people, the houses, and you have small, slow internet connections, you will find that it's not sufficient when you have in your household your father, your mother, your sister, your brother all connected to the internet because your parents are working and because your brothers are also on courses. So it's not easy to have an access to the internet and to be able to cope with all of the classes at the same time in which your parents are working, your students, your sisters, your brothers are studying as well. So it's one of the big challenges in Latin America, in Colombia at least, and specifically when we go to smaller towns in farther regions. So that is a big challenge. But a second challenge regards the health of the students. And well, obviously they feel the same kind of anxiety that all of us have actually suffered this time, and it's connected to the uncertainty of what is actually going to happen. What's going to happen with society, what's going to happen with their own lives. They haven't been able to get in contact with their friends, and they are in an age in which this is extremely important for them. So the anxiety and the uncertainty of not being in contact mixes with some other elements. Unfortunately, in Latin America, for example, in many cases in Latin America, family in-house violence has increased. In many sectors, in many cities, you've seen this kind of spike in family violence. So some of the students have to cope with the anxiety of what's going to happen with their own classes and living in an environment that is not extremely happy, useful to conducting, to study. So they have to live in a house where their parents are going to be fighting, when they are going to have problems with a sister, with a brother. It's not an easy environment for them. So it increases the anxiety. Of course, this is not the case of every single family. I would be exaggerating to say that this is the case, but it is one of the challenges that some of the students actually have. We have, because of this, we already seen consequences in terms of the health of the students. One of my students, for example, was actually suffering from peripheral vertigo for being in front of the computer the entire day. So they were feeling nauseous, they were feeling dizzy, they were having headaches. So it's not easy for them to cope with the whole situation while doing classes and holding the stress of the classes while suffering all of these other consequences. And I believe a third set of challenges regards the type of education model that we have in Colombia and by extension in Latin America. Our education model is not necessarily focused on motivating the self-education of students themselves. Our education model is more focused on you do what we tell you to do. Every single task, we tell you that you need to do it. So instead of having 3 or 4 courses per semester, our students are actually engaged in 6, 7, maybe even 8 courses per semester. So that means that they face a lot of time in front of the computer. Classes take 1.5 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours per week, multiplied by 6 courses or 7 courses. It's a lot of time in front of a computer. So it's not a good setting, for learning. So some of the responses of professors have been to actually, okay, let's reduce our online time, but we will compensate this with extra work, with more workload. So this is generating actually more anxiety and more pain in the students because, okay, I'm not in class online, but I'm still in front of my computer because I need to do these works, these tasks. So it's not easy to cope with that. So that's in regards to the education model. In terms of the response to from universities and the response from professors, I believe the responses are mixed, and it depends a lot on the kind of sources that the university has. Some universities, for example, have adapted very, very rapidly and easily to the online systems. The university I work for in Bogota, Rosario University, unfortunately had the possibility to immediately switch all the classes to Zoom. So we basically just changed the real classroom to an online classroom. So students would go into that classroom in Zoom, they would connect into that classroom, and then the classes will go on rapidly and smoothly. But some universities had to postpone their semesters. They had to say, okay, let's pause, let's buy a good online system. So they had to pause for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, while they prepared all those systems. Some of the universities actually believe that they would be able to go back to classroom classes in this period, and that obviously wasn't possible. So it took them by surprise, absolutely by surprise. I believe, and I'm going to rush a bit into the third section because the time is going really fast as usual when we're speaking. So I think one of the big practices that universities and professors themselves have actually done is to keeping a conversation with students, like knowing how they feel, knowing what their experience is, knowing what they feel is good practice and bad practice. And this dialogue has happened in different ways. Some of the professors have created WhatsApp groups, for example, with their own students in order to have a constant conversation. And how are you feeling? How are you doing? Is this too much work? How's the atmosphere in your house? Like more the kind of an informal conversation that professors have to have with their students. But there's also a dialogue engaged formally by faculties, by universities with their students. So creating focus groups. We have talked in our department, our faculty, we have talked to about 450 students in order to have their feedback, like what works for you, what's good for you. So that let us plan better for the next semester. So that is, I believe, good practice in terms of adapting university to this whole situation. I believe that anything that takes time of the computer for students is good in terms of practice for us professors. Some have made discussions about synchronic and asynchronic activities, like try to reduce the time that you have your students in your class there in front of a computer and try to create some other activities. Maybe documentaries, maybe short films, maybe activities that they can do in their mobile phones. The experience of breakout groups in class or outside of the class, when the students desire to do their breakup groups, that has also proved to be quite good practice. I believe that the training of professors obviously is very important. Our university and some of the universities in Latin America have engaged in very good schemes of training in terms of the online systems, but also in terms of pedagogic techniques to work positively in the online systems. And I believe that also bringing in guests to your class, it's one of the big ones that the students really like, especially in my field where I am, which is politics and international relations. The students love to have people like practitioners from real life, foreign policy, defense, whatever. You can bring them into class and have like a good discussion, like a conversation with your guest. The students love this. And it's time online, but they're learning from a different perspective. And just to finish with, the university, our university and some universities in Latin America are working hard to increase their COIL experiences, the collaborative online international learning experiences, which are taking advantage of the systems of what we're living now. The idea of bringing foreign people, foreign professors, foreign practitioners to your class, it's one of the big advantages of the current era into our class, into our students, and for the benefit of them.